Hello students, I'm Sam sir and we are in the second part of this chapter number 7 of your geography textbook. The chapter is known as Lifelines of National Economy. Be sure to watch the part 1 and part 3 as well. Now this chapter is mainly about railways. The first railway train in India ran between Bombay and Thane on 16th April 1853. There were 3 locomotive engines which pulled the train. They were known as Sahib, Sindh and Sultan. Now, the railways play an important role in the development and economy of our country. And that way, they act like a lifeline to the country. It is the principal mode of transportation for both goods or freight and passengers in India. And this enables business, sightseeing, pilgrimage, casual travel, uh, essential travel, so many kind of travels, personal traveling, and also transportation of goods over longer distances. Railways have been a strong integrating force since the past 167 years. No matter in which part of the country you may live, or you may visit your relatives, they live in a distant place, and then the railways have an important role to play there. It has enabled acceleration and development of agriculture and industry because without the help of railways, agriculture and industry would remain only in that same locality. But that is not the case now. These are some facts about Indian Railways. Now, what geographic and economic factors affect our railways? And the first is the physiographic factors. These are the factors of the land itself and where it is located. Is it in the hilly area, the mountain area, the coastal area, the northern plains, or is it a desert? Then the economic factors and administrative factors. Economic factors are certain parts of the country, they have their economic well-being because of the railways. But the railways in themselves, let's talk about the desert districts of Rajasthan. The railway network is very meager there, and also the population there is very meager. So it's often not feasible, profitable for the railways to run railway services there. That is the economic factor affecting railways. And then, of course, the administrative factor, that is the railway's own administration, and they influence the distribution pattern of the railway network. In some places, you have very good network. Some places you have the local trains, you have the metro, and you also have the long distance trains coming there. The people in those places, they have an option of traveling by which train they want. But in other places where only a passenger train is there, or maybe only a handful of express trains run, then you have to choose from that only. The northern plains have vast level land, high population density, and a rich agricultural resource base. This makes the northern plains economically very attractive to Indian Railways itself. But a presence of a large number of rivers and in the northern plains, they necessitated construction and, of course, also the maintenance of bridges. In the hills of the peninsular region, you have railway tracks laid through low hills, gaps, or tunnels. In this picture, you can see that the tunnel is only almost as wide and as high as the train itself. Another picture of a tunnel. You have problem like landslide. The land beneath the railway track got wiped away in rain, and you have a landslide right on the track, and the engine is only a few meters away from it. Then you have the railways in the mountain region of India. You have railways in the Himalayan belt. We also have some more difficult terrain. It's difficult to lay railway tracks in the sandy region because there is no solidity of the ground. There are swamps in certain parts of the country, like Gujarat, like in the Sundarban areas. So it's difficult to lay railway tracks there. The large forested tracts of MP or Chhattisgarh, Orissa, Jharkhand, also there it's difficult to maintain railway lines. The Sahyadris of the Maharashtra can be crossed only through passes, which are ghats, and these ghats are quite risky for the workers to go, reach, and do provide their services. Konkan Railways it lies in the Western Ghats, and they have overcome problems of sinking tracks and landslides. They have adopted various methods of getting managing this problem. Then pipelines is an interesting way of transporting material which can be transported through pipes such as slurry, or you have oil, crude oil, even gases. Vadinar is a town in Gujarat and Bina is another town in Madhya Pradesh. And the distance between these two towns is 935 kilometers. Sorry. Bina has got a refinery owned by Bharat Petroleum. The refinery's name is Bharat Oman Refineries Limited, and uh, the raw material is transported by pipelines. Now, if you imagine that instead of pipelines, how would it be if trains or tankers were used? The trains and tankers would increase the cost first of all. Then they have the problem of leakages, accidents, handling. All these problems are surpassed if you use pipelines. So this is an interesting and important and efficient way of transporting such materials which can be transported through pipelines. This is a steel slurry pipeline. There are some gas-based industries, fertilizer plants, which came into existence only because of pipelines. We have refineries at Baroni, Mathura, and Panipat, which extensively use and depend on pipelines. The pipelines they have the initial cost of laying it, which is quite high, but afterwards the subsequent costs are very less, almost zero. Only some maintenance is required. It also rules out losses due to wrong shipment or delays. You can be sure that if material has been pumped into the pipeline, it will reach you. This is the network of pipelines in India. Some more information about pipelines, the major ones. Now we talk about waterways. In the first part of the chapter's video, you saw that waterways is actually the cheapest means of transport, and they are also suitable for carrying heavy and bulky goods, which by train is not possible and which by road is also not possible. Waterways are quite efficient. They have good fuel efficiency, and they are also environment friendly because they transport the same weight of material at a lower cost to a larger distance. In India, we have total navigable length of waterways as 14,500 kilometers, but out of that, only roughly or maybe little less than 40%, that is only 5,685 kilometers, are actually navigable by mechanized vessels or boats. Similar to the way we name our national highways, we also name our national waterways as NW1, NW2, so on and so forth. We have these five national waterways in India. We have some inland waterways. Mandvi and Zuari are rivers in Goa, and they are used as waterways for transporting um, ores, especially. This is a river waterway. Now, 95% of India's trade with foreign countries is carried out from ports located along the coast, and these are, I'm talking about the trade with other countries, that is the international trade. Till now we were talking about the internal waterways, so this is the difference. And this 95% of India's trade with international partners, they add to 68% of the value of uh, trade in rupees. So we have large ships doing this work for us. Can you imagine that each container on this ship takes one uh, goods carriage or one large truck? This is what we say, what we mean when we say that ships can carry a lot of material. Talk about bulky material or large material. A ship can carry another ship. We have a good long coastline of 7,516.6 kilometers. We have 12 major seaports, some 200 minor seaports. The first seaport in India was in Kandla in Kutch. Today, Kandla is also uh, uh, famous. That seaport is quite famous for international trade. We have a large volume of trade happening from the Mumbai port. Kandla is also a tidal port, and it enables handling of grains and industrial goods coming in from Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh. Even inland goods are handled there. This is a view of the Vishakhapatnam port. We have the Mumbai port, which is the biggest. It is also very spacious and it's a well sheltered harbor. You have Jawaharlal Nehru Port at Nhava Sheva, which is only a few kilometers away from Mumbai, and this was developed in order to decongest the Mumbai port and also to become a hub port for that region. You have Marmagao, where this is in Goa, and it accounts for half the ore export business of India. And it's a premier iron ore exporting port. We have the New Bangalore port in Karnataka. It exports iron ore from Kudremukh mines. That yellow structure that you see is known as a hopper, and they have conveyor belts, and they are used for loading iron ore onto the ships. You have Kochi port. The old name of Kochi is Cochin. This is in Kerala. This is the extreme southwestern port of India, and it's at the entrance of a lagoon, and it has a natural harbor. That at the in the far distance you can see that sandbar connecting this port with that sandbar is a bridge, and another bridge is connecting that bridge to the Cochin city. That city in the far distance is Cochin city. You have the Thoothukudi port in Tamil Nadu. This is the extreme southeastern port, and it has a natural harbor, and it handles a variety of cargoes from our neighboring countries like Sri Lanka and Maldives. This is a picture from the Thoothukudi port. You have Chennai port, which is one of the oldest artificial port, and when we talk about volumes, it is ranked next only to Mumbai port. Again, a picture of Vishakhapatnam port. This is a deep, landlocked, and well protected port, and it was originally meant for iron ore shipment, the shipment coming from Bailadila region in Chhattisgarh. We have the Paradip port in Odisha. It also receives a lot of iron ore from Odisha, from the Raurkela area. Further upwards, you have the Kolkata port. It is an inland riverine port. Riverine port means you have a river there, and Hooghly is a river, and since it's a tidal port, it requires constant cleaning or dredging. This port serves as a very large and rich hinterland on the Ganga Brahmaputra basin. Since this port handles lot of material, another port was developed, that is the Haldia port, and that was developed as a subsidiary port in order to relieve the growing pressure on Kolkata port. This is Haldia port, and it's very modern by modern standards, very clean and neatly arranged. Now we talk about the airways. We have some uh, 125 airports, and they are all managed by Airports Authority of India. Airways are the fastest, more comfortable, and prestigious mode of transport, and they have the advantage of transporting people and material over difficult terrain with quite much ease, and that also brings the north and eastern states into easy access. In India, air transport was nationalized in 1953 when Air India was launched, and then later it had some subsidiaries and also some problems. We also have Pawan Hans helicopter service, which provides service to offshore oil platforms such as that of the ONGC. ONGC stands for Oil and National Gas Commission, and also in difficult to reach areas such as the interiors of Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand. Indian Airlines also fly to the neighboring countries, but air travel is still not within everybody's reach. And when it comes to the northeastern states, you have to uh, give provisions, some special provisions for the common people there. The helicopters have the advantage of using a small area for takeoff and landing. Now, this helicopter has landed on a village road. And to inform you, this helicopter is actually a hospital, and it has got some medical people on it, and it provides service to the villages in the northeastern states. In northeastern states, because it's difficult to access by other modes of transport, the helicopter service provides service to the common people as well, the civilians as well. This is end of part 2 of the chapter. Be sure to watch the part 1 if you haven't done so, and wait for the part 3. I'll see you then. Give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Bye.